Good thing I'm sitting next to you, so you just talk. Hey, at least I know my limit.
Hey, it's all good. You know, it's
Like Brandon says, like a very else. That's not me. That is Jordan and I.
Melanie, I'm hungry. Sit down.
Really?
Not be by you.
The loud sound. Go back.
Alex, can you hear us?
Yep, I can hear you.
Giant backpack.
Is this yours? I was looking all around for it. I did, yeah, sorry.
So I have you. Yes. Garrett has told me he doesn't want to right.
Oh, okay.
So I can do an emergency plan.
There was it.
I was looking back at the and then the sprint. His mom and I talked. And she said that Sam has his kayaks on sale right now. But kind of the beginning, like, I asked him about it again this Saturday. You know, as you're right in the hot spot, what do you think that you're on? Here. I'm right here. People need a tandem.
Yeah.
We're not we did our longest ride. We went down to part of Iowa. No, shut everything off. Down to Iowa, Slater. And we rode down on the hike trail for a while. And rode some Slater stuff. Great, super nice. And then we did the hike trestle bridge. And Aaron verified. Do you want me to just go? And yes, they ended up with 12. And then I went. We just went up to Gilbert. Last night was so much fun. And rode. It's super small. It's like 6 miles. I started doing it right to Ellsworth. It's 6 miles. It's very easy. But Sweet Treats ice cream is there, so we hit up Sweet Treats. But that was another fair time trials to see how fast it is. I say that.
Mr. President, we're ready at any time you're ready. Andrew?
Ready?
We're ready anytime you are.
All right, I'm gonna go ahead and call this meeting to order. Roll call, please, Gail.
Josh. Tyler.
Here.
Alex. Alex. Jeff.
Yep.
And Andrew.
Yep.
All present.
Motion to approve the agenda.
So move. Second.
Further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Agenda passed. Public forum. Do we have anyone here to speak? Public forum and emails? All right, moving along. Oral reports, announcements, celebrations. Dr. T, it's all you.
Well, good evening, everyone. I just have a couple things before we get into some really good stuff here. I wanted to just acknowledge under summer work, our custodial staff at our grounds, and as well as facility staff. They have worked so hard to make sure that our buildings are ready. Our teachers are starting to come back, and we know our kids will be here soon. Everything from waxing the floors to washing every classroom and every desk and every chair. And that takes a lot of time. And sometimes I don't think people realize all that goes into that summer work. I'd like to mention Dave, who works in this building. He sent out a little weekly update of what was happening, and I thought we should put that together in a book because it's very interesting how he writes it about the work that they were doing. So I'm just very grateful to everyone's hard work related to getting the year off to a good start. Also with that is our district office staff in registration, our registrar, in accounting, and Gail with all that she does related to as our business manager, and Jill, who supports the work that I do, but really supports all of us, Carrie, Vic. It's a real team effort that we all work together to get things ready, but I'm just really grateful to our team in the district, but also the custodians you drive by at any time and you see the grounds guys out there mowing away to make our facilities look great. And then there's been lots of projects going on within the buildings that sometimes you don't always see, but if they didn't do those things, we would certainly miss them. So I'm very grateful to everyone who's getting us ready for back to school. So that's that.
Awesome, thank you.
That then leads us to back to school reports. So we know back to school is coming around the corner. We're very excited. New teachers, they're all coming back, and we're very excited to start the school year off. And I know principals, we had an all-day training with principals today as we get ready to work with everyone, and can't wait for our kids to come. So we are excited.
All right, admin reports, counselors update.
Okay, let me just throw that out. So
I see a group.
I know, we have a wonderful group here today. I'm very excited and very grateful to all of them for being here. So back in May, I was asked a question, what are we doing for the wellness of our students? And I know in the work that we've been doing with our counselors and the counselors, the work they've been doing with our students and families, it's extensive. I'm very proud of the work that they do. There's always more to be done, but unfortunately there's not enough hours in the day. We know that, and they've shared that with me. So what I asked them to do is come and share the things that we are doing for wellness, K-12, what it looks like, so you all have a better understanding of what that looks like. And then also what we're looking to the future. There's more to be done. It's not a one, I call it a one-shot wonder. It's not a one-time conference and then we're done with it. It's that we need to continue to look at what is it our kids need so that we can best support them. So I'm going to turn over to counselors, but please introduce yourselves. Let's see, I can go down the list. I'm getting good, but I want you to introduce yourselves and tell us who you are, what building you work in, and then share with us all your great knowledge. Welcome.
Sure. Well, we first of all want to say thank you for having us here and for listening to what we will present for you tonight. My name is Jenny Thomas. I am one of the middle school counselors here, and we'll start down here. Mel Wooden and Dee Dee Hazelhop and Joyce Berry. And you know what? I did not give like what they do, so they're too. So Mel Wooden is our family advocate, and Dee Dee Hazelhop is K2. Joyce Berry in the intermediate, 3-5. Hannah Gorman, another one of the middle school counselors, and I am also one of the middle school counselors. Paul Jacobson in the high school, 11-12, and Jordan Sitzma, 9-10 in high school as well. So what we talked about with sharing with you tonight is what a day looks like for us and what we do in our days, and then we're going to share some of our additional things we do and some areas too that we see some needs that we have. So I'll turn it over to Mel. Okay.
Okay, so I'm Mel Wooden, and I have like one of the newer positions on the counseling team. I'm a student family advocate. So I work with all the students and families. Most of them are at-risk families. And I work at the elementary and the intermediate, kind of helping Joy and Dee Dee throughout the day. And so next slide just talks about all the things I do. I'm also the district-wide homeless liaison. Do a lot of family giving, holiday giving. I'm a teen mental health first aid trainer, which is something a few of us went through the training, and we trained sophomores and juniors last year for teen mental health first aid. And I do individual and small groups, supportive SEL. Yeah, basically, I'm just the assistant to these lovely ladies. But mostly my main job is to help with all the families at risk. So assistance like resources in our community, rent, energy, gas. And then I also coordinate all the mental health. If the families can't get to see a therapist, we actually do have some therapists that come into our school, and I organize all that and I collaborate with them and get the kids to see a therapist as much as possible.
I am Dee Dee Hazelhoff and the elementary school counselor. I have a kind of a day in the life there. My mornings, what I do is I get to see individuals in small groups in the mornings, and then I teach whole class lessons all afternoon. I love what I do. I really want to say that first. But one of the things that I do a lot in the mornings is reactive services. And that's one of those things that you just have to be there in person doing. We've seen a big increase in students who have some anxiety in coming to school. That might be tears, that might be fighting getting out of the car, that might be not willing to go to the classroom, there's a lot of things that looks like. So it's just the goal is to get kids comfortable, and that's a throughout the year thing, kind of comes and goes for different kids. But then of course, small groups and individuals, and kind of jumping over to some of our supportive services. One of the things is we're using is Savers. And that is a social academic SAE, emotional behavior
report.
Yes, I can't remember the R stands for. But anyways, we're using this data from teachers and from kids to say, hey, where are our biggest needs at? And then we take that data as well as parent referrals and teacher referrals, and we work to figure out, okay, who needs individual supports, we can put in a group, we can work together. And then our goal is that is a somewhat short term, like anywhere 6 to 12 weeks. And then of course, we're turning it over and we're meeting with the next group of students. And so that's what my morning is, as well as of course, parent collaboration, colleague collaboration, and hopefully some planning time in there. Some of the things that we're using, and a lot of these are actually, well, some are district-wide, some are just for littles. I don't think our high schoolers are using Mind Yeti, very much so for our younger students. But Move Mindfully is one that it's been an amazing resource that we've pushed out, that is happening district-wide. But then I have some things that I'm using like Second Step and Mind Up to help kids understand our brain. You've got your amygdala and you've got your prefrontal cortex, and really working to keep our upstairs brain and downstairs brain working together. Finally, up at the top there, iOS SEL competencies came out in November of 2019, right before COVID hit. And we're just one of the big things I want to push for our teachers this year, which will support and families to support our students, is what those are and how we can use them. It's happening in those guidance classes very, very heavily in small groups and individual work, but how can we transform that and make sure it's also getting pieces in the classroom as well? So it's not just within those 50-minute classes.
Okay, and I am Joyce Berry, the school counselor for grades 3-5 here at the intermediate. And I probably get the award for having the most slides, not that you guys are gonna love that, but I'll try to fly through this because I know this is kind of an information overload, but I summarized basically what my responsibilities are. Most of the day is spent with teaching classes of guidance. I have 3 every morning, and then I do a lot of small group work. Like Dee Dee, we use the same curriculum of Second Step, Move Mindfully, and Mind Up. And we also use the Savers to to screen for social emotional skills where there's a lack of those. And then we take that data and create small groups. So I meet with small groups, sometimes up to 4 a day, depending on scheduling. That's always the challenge. And then I have lunch groups as well. And as you said, reactive services, I call crisis and responsive services. And that's a big chunk of every day. And then the other things are just, other things we're part of. Parent interactions, of course, staff interactions, all kinds of meetings. We're part of most all meetings. So that's just an overview of kind of my responsibilities. If we could go to the next slide. I've tried to collect data for the last 2 years pretty intensively, which is also time consuming, but I'm going to just say over the next 3 slides, 9, 10, and 11, it's basically just kind of showing the increase that we've seen as far as needs. Basically, those needs are identified through, like you're saying, just things that happen, a child that refusing to go into the classroom, things like that. But also our Savers data identifies those kids that are at risk of having social and emotional skills that they need to be working on. So, you can see just through these next 3 slides, an increase of how many students are needing to be served and how many kids I am meeting with. It's increasing significantly. So the next slide you'll see as well. This is recording my student interactions. The amount of students I've met with has not increased over the last year as well. I guess it has, because this data was summarized as of May 3rd. I had a counseling intern that helped me beautifully summarize all my data. And after that, I had a hard time getting time to kind of summarize everything. So as of May 3rd, I'd already met with 1,024. So there was an increase, but a significant increase as well in the amount of time needed to meet with those students. So those 3 slides just kind of show that trend. This slide I think the big picture of this slide is basically looking to me, the red flag is the red section, which is, as you said, reactive services. You can see in 2020 and 2021, it wasn't even measuring with a number. So I don't know, maybe 5% or something. And then last year that increased to 23% of the interactions that I'm having with students on an individual basis were crisis response or reactive responsive services. So that's just kind of breaking down what am I doing with those students, those individual students. This is just one more thing that the data was kind of showing. Next slide, just to summarize the big increases that I noticed over these last 2 years, about a 62% increase in the amount of group sessions. So again, that's a reflection of the needs of the students. A 67% increase in the time spent in groups from those 2 years, those 2 school years, and then a 27% increase in the time spent with individuals. And then 33% increase in total student contact time. So as you can see, as we all know, there are mental health issues that are increasing that we're dealing with all the time here. So the next slide just summarizes. I took kind of a snapshot over a 40-day period of what was happening, because I felt like I was missing out on so many interactions with students or meetings or having to cancel things and conflicts with scheduling. So over a 40-day time period, I had my intern help me summarize this. There were 33 classes in 40 days that were impacted by a conflict of scheduling or too many needs at one time that I couldn't meet. 57 group or individual sessions that had to be canceled or meetings that were missed in a 40-day time period. So that just kind of reflects how stretched thin we are at this point. So fortunately, I didn't have to cancel those classes because I had a counseling intern, so that was helpful.
All right, so kind of give you an idea for middle school counseling, what it looks like for us over at the middle school. And what I did here when I put the slide together was I wanted to give you an idea of some of the daily tasks that I did. And then alongside of that, like some of the things that I participate in weekly as well. So you can see where meeting with students and planning and teaching 2 classes. I'm in an exploratory rotation. And so I rotate different groups of students over a 7-week period. This year with 6th grade, it'll be over a 6-week period with adding the next section. But a lot of that time was spent with also meeting with students, meeting with faculty, and collaborating with them and helping our students. And we found last year, as you've been hearing other counselors talking, that crisis response has gone up dramatically. And where I listed that under my daily time as my number 1 point, because that's probably where I spent the most time last year, was with meeting with students. Weekly, I'm in meetings, helping collaborate when student concerns arise. I'm there to help give ideas or help step in or help give resources or help refer out. And so having that there as well was being part of those meetings was really beneficial. And you could see too, with some of those weekly times, I was able to teach some data-based small groups and
I was checking data for trends and meeting with Mr. Danielson, and we were talking about what are things that we're seeing and what are ways that we need to step in and help our students. And as we were seeing with a lot of the response, and a lot of times I was being pulled out of meetings, being pulled out of classroom teaching, and people were having to step in and teach my classes, where we saw we had a really strong need for more help. So that's why I have somebody sitting next to me that I'm so forever grateful for. So going on to the next slide, you can see, in addition to the things that I was working on with students daily and some of the meetings and I was doing weekly, I was also doing a lot of coordinating of helping our students who were coming into the middle school and who are exiting the middle school, and preparing them both ways for what middle school life would be like. And then in addition to that, with helping with the crisis response, where I'm reaching out to the Department of Human Services when needed, when we were dealing with suicidal ideation, helping respond in that way. So when you pair that all with student response and the teaching and the small groups and all of that, we were in need of some additional help. So the next slide after that shows what we were doing mental health wise in the middle school last year, and some of the resources and some of the additional things we did to help. Highlighting a few, we've had a health class in our 8th grade opposite PE for a while now. And I'll show in the next slide in a bit here of how we're adding into that with some more mental health help in our 6th grade and our 7th grade. But we brought in Ames Police Department to help show some of the needs and also some of the importance of being safe on social media and how that's impacted mental health of our middle schoolers, which was really beneficial. Another one of our teachers teaches a mindfulness group. She led a Tiger Time, not a Tiger Time, it was an MTSS group where she taught yoga and mindfulness, and students could choose to be part of that. And it was one of our higher number MTSS groups. So students were showing that that was something they were wanting to learn more about, and a lot of positive feedback was coming out of that with students. So there's a list of what we were doing last year, and we'd like to continue that this year. And then for the 22-23, you can see that some of the additional supports that we put into place is opposite PE. Instead of having that literature class, which kind of gets folded into language arts now, we are adding a health class opposite PE in 7th grade, and we're adding a wellness class opposite PE. And those teachers met together and they're looking at the Mind Up curriculum and they're implementing that, and that's going to be taught to all students in those grade levels at least twice a week. And the biggest bullet point of that is the addition of Hannah Gordon in our building, and we're so excited and so thankful to have her as an additional resource. And our first day together was super successful, and we're ready for about another 180 more of that. So just wanted to say thank you again for that support, and moving on.
So I'm Jordan Setzma. I'm the 9-10 counselor. I work with Paul, who works with 11 and 12. We kind of divide up that way for scheduling purposes. We tell kids, like, if you're a freshman, you go into Mr. Jacobs, you're not gonna get zapped at the door, but we just kind of divide up that way for scheduling. So on the next slide, we kind of put together what a day in the life and a week in the life that is constantly changing at the high school level. But a lot of our time is spent in those responsive services, meeting with students regarding obviously social emotional learning, but also academic. A lot of the college and career planning, a lot of working with kids, especially Paul, DMAC and Iowa State, making sure kids are earning the credits they need to graduate. I work with a lot of our at-risk students in partnership with DMAC with our at-risk consortium. So like I said, we're constantly in collaboration with students, parents, outside resources. We collaborate a lot with our administration. I don't know that there's a single day where I'm not over in our principal's offices just collaborating on how best to meet students' needs as well as staff. And that's something that Mr. Jakes and I have really taken seriously in addition to our administration, is how we're also supporting staff in addition to students. So we've really been trying to be a good sounding board, provide additional resources. When we taught teen mental health first aid with staff also, when they were in the classroom, that was just a really great collaboration point for us. Like I said, weekly, We're meeting as that tier 2 team to collaborate on our at-risk students, as well as kids who maybe are new to kind of that category and who are kind of having some struggles. Always collaborating with admin and instructional coaches, and also we're participating in our district counseling meetings. We want to make sure that the verbiage that we're using, kind of our, how we do things is consistent K-12 as needed. Again, those safety plan and reentry meetings, those have become very frequent over the last year. We've had a lot more of those. We want to make sure that if a student is gone, even if it's just, you know, they came out with mono, right, and they've been gone for a little while, how are they coming back to school? How can we support that student? We've also seen a big increase in students needing additional mental health services, so we want to make sure that they have a good safety plan coming back in. I'm also in charge of 504 accommodations. Mr. Jacobson assists with those when it comes to ACTs, like a lot of community referrals for students, crisis management, and we also do scheduling, which our students are, you know, itching to get those schedules, but working with admin also on creating the master schedule on how to serve students needs the best.
I'm Paul Jacobson and work mostly with the 11th and 12th graders. And before I get started, I really want to thank the board and the whole community. I've been here, this will be my 18th year here at Gilbert. So I've seen tremendous growth. My daughter graduated with 77 people in her class. And so it's completely different, going from just 2 buildings to 4 buildings. You know, Mr. Danielson and I and one other counselor were the only ones here at K-12. And, you know, both Mr. Danielson and I really advocated a lot over the years for school counselors. And I can't tell you how happy I am to be a part of this fantastic group. Just very happy that you guys are all here. So
You're on number 2.
yeah. Yeah, I'm reminded of that all the time. That's okay. That's all right. So, you know, I want to bring up just some basics when it comes down to school counseling. You guys have heard a lot of the details of what school counselors do. And this team is so motivated and they have amazing support in their buildings to be school counselors, which we're very fortunate. Not all schools are set up that way. It's oftentimes school counselors are doing things that have nothing to do with their job. And so Gilbert has always supported the school counselors to actually be school counselors. And that's fantastic. But just some basics about what school counseling is about, really K-12, but I'll focus on high school. With academic planning, Ms. Sitzma and I, you know, starting with, and Ms. Thomas actually too, with the 8th graders in the spring, is planning for high school. And how do you graduate from high school? How do you plan for whatever your goal is for after high school? How is it that you're going to create a schedule that will get you the credits and the experience, the exposure you need to be able to accomplish your goals after high school? Ms. Sitzma and I, and especially Ms. Sitzma this last year, has dedicated a huge percentage of her year to schedule. It is a lot of work to be planning for each semester, planning for the next year, making sure that admin is very knowledgeable about the numbers, what the requests look like. And so staffing decisions can be based on what the students are really wanting to take in the future. So academic planning is a big deal in the high school. And of course, with juniors and seniors, we want to make sure that they're going to meet all the requirements, which we've had a fantastic graduation rate here at Gilbert. And we also have a large college-going culture here at Gilbert. So wanting to make sure that they're meeting their requirements to get into the college of their choice. Another aspect of school counseling is college and career planning. And really this is K-12 as well. What Dee Dee's teaching in the classroom, you know, employers are seeking these skills of kids being able to to problem solve and communicate and effectively express themselves and things like that. So the college and career planning is just not necessarily saying as a 17-year-old that you need to know what you're going to do the rest of your life. And we're not about that. But trying to give them as many resources as possible to be able to navigate their future and be able to accomplish those goals. Then the social and emotional domain. You know, most school counselors go into school counseling because they deeply care for kids and their parents and want to be able to serve some of the behaviors that we see, the emotions that we see in school, and to be able to make sure these kids can self-regulate themselves so they can be successful in school and in the job later on in life. And just some examples of things that we've done in the social and emotional domain is we've made a huge investment in this district for mental health. And I think we're really just hitting the tip of the iceberg of what the future is going to be. You know, with the new YSS building that's going to be built here in the future, I think that's going to be an amazing resource for our community. Another benefit, you see some of these discussing human trafficking, substance abuse, and mental health. At Gilbert, we're very, very fortunate that we have great support from the teachers. You know, as high school counselors, we do not teach classes necessarily. So we're not in the room seeing like all the 10th graders for a whole semester or something like that, or even 5-6 weeks. And so how we get into the classroom is the teachers allowing us some of their time. And so that has been fantastic. I know before Ms. Sitzma was hired, I was trying to get into the classroom between 30 and 45 days out of the year. As we got, I would say maybe 10 years ago or so, I was getting down to about 15 days. I was getting spread too thin. And then when we hired Ms. Sitzma again, I was back up into the 30s, and last year I was in the classroom almost 45 days. Now, sometimes that's for 10 minutes, but it's nice to be able to go in and actually speak with students face to face. Oops, backwards. When it comes down to school counseling also, there's two main aspects that we look at, and that's the mindsets and behaviors of our students. And so, you know, ultimately, if we can get our students through school, and if their goal is to go into the workforce, to get them to be the best employees, managers, CEOs, we can do here. It's also helping to communicate with parents so that we can help support the goals that the parents have for their kids as well.
So kind of looking ahead as a district counseling staff, one of, again, some of the barriers that we have right now is time, right? We have increased need and there's only so much time during the day, but just manpower. ASCA does recommend 1 counselor per 350 students. We're really blessed that in 2 of our buildings, we're at that ratio. Myself, Mr. Jacobson, and now
250, whoops, it's
I was
250.
like 350, I was like, oh,
It's pretty high.
Yeah,
but
that's
that's
not right.
250. So Mr. Jacobson and I are at that with a little over 500 kids in our building. Mrs. Thomas was not at that last year, she is now. But like I said, in our elementary and intermediate, we're not quite there. At the high school especially, we've seen a large increase in mental health and substance use needs, whereas like I said, the rest of the building is definitely an increase in mental health. With partnering with Story County, we've also been partnering a lot with Polk County, having to send some of our kids down to Clyde Behavioral. The limited availability right now, I mean, for some of our students to be evaluated, we're lucky if they can get it in 6 months. You know, therapists have year-plus long waiting lists, and like I said, that's if they take your insurance. And so that's becoming very much so increasingly difficult. kind of a blessing though, is we do have an increased awareness of the services that we offer. I can, speak for Mr. Jacobs and myself, parents are reaching out to us more, asking, are you able to meet with my student? What resources in the community are there? So we've definitely seen an increased awareness in what we can provide to students. That's been really great. As far as the elementary, continuing that level of service that DD's been able to provide, increasing awareness on competencies, and at the intermediate, again, continuing that level of service that we have to students and putting them first. And like I said, that means sometimes missing other things, but really valuing the time that we have with our students, and just meeting the continuing growing needs of our student staff and our families. That's something that I think when we've all been meeting, we've really, yes, we focus on the student, but we're also focusing on how we're able to serve their family. Because when we sit in a room, there are many times where all of us have someone in the family. So looking at, okay, how do we help meet the needs of that student in a building, but also as a whole, and Mel has been a huge piece of that puzzle. So we're very, very grateful to have her as well. So those are kind of how we're serving kids today and how we're serving staff and families today, but also how we hope to continue to serve them in the future. That's all.
Thank you.
Question that I had, and I don't know if anyone wants to expand, but I obviously really appreciate everything you guys do. And yet it's a village, right? So you guys can't take it all on. So my question is, how do you mention collaborate with teachers? How is it that you collaborate with teachers, let them know what's going on either individually or collectively, and yet still allow them the administrative with the principals? How do you collaborate with them, keep them updated, and yet knowing they've got administrative things to take care of? I mean, can you talk a little bit about how you share what you're learning, or share maybe about students?
I can kind of speak from a high school standpoint. A huge focus that Paul and I have, and also Mrs. Bassett and Mr. Ronka, is empowering students to be a huge advocate for themselves. And then when we meet with teachers, going, you already are spinning 50,000 plates. I'm not here to give you 4 more. Here is how I'm empowering the student. Here's in the ways I'm working with the student. Here are some things that might be helpful in the classroom that aren't adding additional things. Because at the high school level, especially, we want kids, we're not going to be there. Let's say it's a senior, if they go off to college or they go to the workforce, we're not going to be there to tell our boss, hey, they actually need this. So how do we give the student those tools to advocate for themselves? And like I said, Mrs. Bass and Mr. Rock have been huge in also advocating for that. And we also are pulling in parents, going, hey, let's make sure the language we're using at school is the same language we're using at home, so we can make sure we're all on the same page. That's where a lot of those safety and reentry meetings come into place. But we kind of communicate with teachers of, this is for your information, not necessarily an action step all the time, so that way teachers don't feel like they're in the dark about things, but also knowing that they're trying to meet the needs of 28 kids in a classroom, and that's not possible all the time, especially when we have some kids that are very high need. So it's saying, how can we support you in the classroom? Not, here's one more thing for you to do. And so for all this, we take that role very, very seriously. How do we support staff just as much as how can we support students and their families?
I'll speak to confidentiality with that, because you don't want to, when a student comes to you and they have a need, or a family comes to you and you have a need, that's not public knowledge. And so we don't tell everybody, hey, guess what so-and-so did last night? And so a lot of what those conversations look like is, last night was not good, keep your eye on the student. That's the link that it is. And piggybacking on supporting the students in that, I will tell teachers, if you see a student maybe doing this coping skill in your class, that's a clue to you that they're maybe feeling escalated somehow and they're calming themselves down. So more of a heads up for them. So then they're aware too of, like, they see a kid doodling maybe while they're talking, that kid's not being disrespectful and distracting, that kid's just helping themselves listen better. Or maybe they've got some extra fidgety energy that they're trying to get rid of so they can pay attention. I've also shown teachers too some easy mindfulness things, and that was training that we all had as a K-12 district of like, these are really easy mindfulness breathing exercises that students may do. You may see students tracing their hand. That's a cue to you that they're calming themselves down when they breathe. And so that they're aware of that and that they're not thinking, what's that student doing? There's helping build that knowledge for them. So then there's a little bit of compassion there too, with those students who are doing their best in their classrooms that they can.
How's parental involvement? Is it when it's called for, when you're trying to communicate back and forth, is it where you'd like it to be? Or if it's not, I mean, how much influence do you have over that? I know because sometimes that can be a challenge, but.
I think at the lower levels, there's a lot more parent involvement. I think that's where our big area of time comes in. If I meet with 25 kids in a day, there's no way I can contact 25 parents. But I wish that I could. I wish I could say, oh, this is what we went over, this is how we're going forward. And like, it's usually the tip of the iceberg, like, okay, these are our really hardest hitters right now. So that's where the collaboration is gonna come in, where I try to work as that kind of team leader sometimes, making sure the teacher knows what they need to know to support the student. As well as the administrator knows what they need to know, and then what are the supports that are happening between the parents, myself, and the child.
See, that's kind of one of my roles too, like if a teacher has a concern about a family or a certain student, maybe safety or just their needs aren't being met, I kind of take that off their plate a little bit. They'll come and talk to me, and then I take it from there and contact the parents, and sometimes they come in and we sit down and talk about what's going on, but yeah, I feel like that's one way I can support the teachers is by kind of taking that off their plate, being the DHS contact.
I'll speak just from my own personal experiences. Gilbert, in all aspects, the parents are very involved. They deeply care about their kids and they're very involved. So I think probably we could all say that we agree with this, I think, but in the high school, parents are working with their teens who are striving for independence. And the parents are really trying to make sure that their son or daughter is successful in school. But sometimes parents are at a loss. Maybe it's easier when their kids are younger to be able to influence them and get them to do what it is that they want. But as these teenagers are becoming more independent and trying to maybe live their own life a little bit more, I think as high school counselors, we're coaching parents a lot of the time. So how to be able to negotiate conversations to get what it is that they want from their kids. For some parents, it's a struggle to be able to get their kids to do what they want them to do. So we try to help coach supports.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I have one for the high school. Do you have a systematic process in which people start looking at life after high school? I mean, like, so when you come in as a freshman, you fill out a form or something and say, here's what I'm interested in. And you guys monitor that through the 4 years in which they go through school? And how does that all work?
I don't want to speak for Jordan, but I know it really starts earlier than 8th grade. But when it's really dealing with high school, it really starts in 8th grade with doing some career planning and then that's how they begin picking the classes based on their interests and career goals, education goals. So they're planning for after high school, the beginning. That's when they're picking their classes in 8th grade. And then throughout high school, whether it's in the classroom or we just purchased here right at last year a program called Zello, and working with students on that it's really a fantastic program. It's just the graphic design behind it is attractive to students. You know, there's so many resources out there that it's hard to get resources that aren't designed for adult eyes. And so Zello is really good at being attractive to young people. So I've been really impressed with that. So now that was right at the end of the year that we were able to really get going with that. So I would say this year, the curriculum within Zello. Something that we're using.
Any other questions? Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you for
really
coming.
good.
And what I commend is, as each one you presented, it was neat to see everybody else's reactions, and you can just see how well you guys all work together. So I think that is so cool. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Go enjoy the weather. All right, Christine, back to you.
Okay, just taking thank you so much, counselors, really appreciate you and being here tonight. But moving to staff service and planning, you have that schedule in front of you. And there's lots of important things that are happening there. All staff will be welcome back on Wednesday, August 17th. We're very excited about that, and we'll have the rally, and then they'll work together from there, working at their building. So the whole list is there. We have new employees attending, all new teachers coming on Thursday, August 11th, but you can see the schedule there. So there's a lot of good learning that are going to take place, and everybody's going to be excited to get into their classrooms and be inspired and start the year. So that's that piece. Any questions there? Good. Okay. And then district goals, I just wanted to update you. So if you recall, we had the goals last year. We put them, I think we voted on them maybe in January. It was a little bit longer of a process just because it took some time as I was new. So we have created a draft proposal of updating those goals and worked with the principals today on those. They're not quite ready for even in draft form to share with you yet, but by our next meeting, I will have a draft for you and we can take a look at. But similar to what we have had, just making some tweaks based on increasing wellness, increasing leadership are some of the pieces that we're talking about there. We had a great meeting with the principals today about that. And then the last piece that I had under administrative reports is the enrollment update. If you notice the enrollment, we are up in enrollment over 60 additional students compared to where we were a year ago. And so that number is going to, we believe, continue to climb right up until the first day of school. So that's where we are on enrollment, continue to grow. And that concludes my piece for reports.
Christine, do you just to clarify for anybody that might be listening, but that is residence. That is not.
Correct. That is resident. No.
That's residence.
That is residence. Thank you for the clarification. Open enrollment, if you look at that chart, is closed in every grade level except I think
Kindergarten and first grade.
Yep. Kindergarten, kinder prep, kindergarten, and then third grade, I believe, where we have a few openings left. The increased enrollment is families that have moved into the district. So, and we anticipate each day we're getting more registration. So we think that number will be up even more, but we'll see when they arrive. So.
And our budget was on what number? Yeah.
We have
1.8%.
1%. But that will be updated as the figures come available. So as we move, if you think about it, it's a moving target now that we're in a new year. So anytime that we have knowns, for example, the date that will change is October 1, because we will know what that actual is. So that's when we will enter that known into our forecasting model. So like for example, we receive the information for right now our taxes. So that's what's known, that's the latest thing that was updated is our taxable valuation and our tax rate. So now as we move forward, once we close the June books, and those ending fund numbers become beginning fund numbers, then that will be updated. So then that'll be like August, September for sure. So the next big date would be October 1 for enrollment. So as that becomes known, then we would change that. So it's just evolving as estimates become actuals. And then when we get those figures in there for enrollment, then we will need to set our new priorities and our new goals of what do we want our expenditures to be for the next year? Basically, what do we want our solvency to be? But that can't happen until we know basically the enrollment, because that's the major factor, and then we can estimate what the SSA or the state will give us funding, but we will know the enrollment, which is a major piece of the twofold SSA rate and the enrollment.
We're gonna have Ipsos come next school board meeting to give us another projection, once we have a better idea with, kids.
But your
and
budget
students.
was on zero, right?
I believe, as we looked at, the current model reflects a 1.8% enrollment growth.
Which would be how many on your 1,500?
For fiscal year 2022, so. And then expenditures for 2 to 2.25 for 22. So we do not have anything for, let's see. I'd have to go and check. I'll let
I
you know.
guess what I'm trying to get at, Gail, is I think going forward with the amount of increase we're seeing, it does us no good doing budgeting at 1.5% when that's not even close. We're more than that. And I get waiting to get the numbers, but you know, if we're a district that truly has got to build and has to accommodate for more kids, we have to have some, and like Andy said, next week, we're gonna get this guy in here, so we'll wait. But I think we have to really put some validity in our numbers going forward, or it doesn't look very good.
So I think, I agree with you, and I think what we have to agree on is, well, what are we gonna trust for numbers?
Right.
So what Gail has in there is what Ifs just told us.
To be conservative, to
Right.
be, that's what our trend line were.
Yeah. So I think that's why we've asked them to come back,
Right.
look at the actuals versus
It's off.
what they projected, because they're off.
They took
Yeah.
flat this year.
Yeah.
We're not
Yeah.
flat, so now we're trying to.
So
Yeah.
I agree with you, but I would say, well, then Gail's gonna be asking us, well, then what do you want me to? And what I would like to see is If's numbers again.
Yeah.
And pressure test that.
Yeah, something.
We need to
Something,
find
yeah,
that,
something.
yeah, and it's a work session, right?
Yep.
We need to find, and we need to be happy with, the worst thing we wanna do is overestimate. But find what is we're comfortable with without overestimating, then we would really get into a problem of overestimating, over creating revenue, which in return will inflate our expenses that may not happen. The revenue side of that, then we would be upside down. So we have to be comfortable with our numbers as we work through this information in our work session.
I think time.
But it works both ways. It works both ways. I guess what I'm saying is, I get trying to be conservative. But if you look at our growth pattern and what we're gonna go through in the next few years, being negligent conservative isn't acceptable.
Right, and I agree with that, yes. But that's where we have to, where do we feel comfortable with what those new numbers are going to
Like
be?
these guys,
We
we'll
didn't have
figure
growth,
that
I
out.
mean, last year our growth was 0.4 or 0.2. I mean, it was a couple
This
It was
kids.
not 1%.
Yeah. So we just gotta see if this is a blip, if this is not, I mean, I think we may all agree it's probably not, but again, I really wanna see the data. to prove it.
Okay.
So,
The other piece I'll say is that we worked with the architects today with the principals, and Andrew shared some of the work that he's doing with the information that he has related to enrollment. So it'll be interesting, that's one of the things he talked about, is that the growth was predicted to be 1.8 and we're over that. And so then what does that look like moving forward? And so I look forward to next week's or next month's presentation, and then we have the information that he's gathered as well to put that all together to make some good decisions.
Because to your point, Jeff, I mean, I went back to IFS's January 2022, right? So that's not that long ago.
Correct.
And based upon the numbers we have now that we know, we've fast forwarded 3 years from their projections. Right?
Yeah,
So-
and you know, and I'm not blaming anybody. I just think we, as a board, probably gotta do a better job.
Well, Again, what are we gonna use for
Right, I
information?
get it.
I've been here 10 years and there was a time 6, 7 years ago when I thought, look at all these buildings, we're gonna have crazy growth.
Yeah.
And I'm not the one that's gonna project or forecast enrollment, right?
Yeah.
But we do need to trust whoever we're working with. And then we can decide, I mean, because Gail needs it, CMBA needs it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. We need it for funding.
Do we, when we get, so again, 60+ kids so far, do we have a breakdown of where, I mean, is it new, is it homeschooling, is it, I mean, where do we have enough, will we know where that's coming from?
It's not all, it's not all in the 6th grade, but we at grade level, it's more the middle section.
Yeah,
It's more of the kids in the middle.
Okay.
We thought maybe it would be we remember we talked about the kindergartners.
Mhm.
If you roll into the pre-K kids, or preschool, Carrie, if I got that right, the preschool number is much higher this year. And part of that is that we offered transportation. And so that kids could, so that made a big difference for us. So that's where we're seeing all of that rolls that together, but it's that 6th, 7th, and 8th grade that we're seeing it.
Okay.
So that's where it's coming from. And then there's some factors tied to that, like I think one of our schools, they only go to the
yeah.
6th grade and things like that, so.
All right, moving along, we don't have any board reports. Any other question on enrollment?
So thanks for the time, though.
Yeah, no, I apologize. Bye, Josh. You okay with it? All right, make sure. No board reports, facilities reports. I know CMBA, I know they're here. They just got done with the stakeholders meeting. Do we have any questions for them in regards to the process since they're here? Meetings are going okay, or going well?
It's been great so far. Last week we met with city leaders
Mhm.
and got kind of their feedback on what they are seeing.
Transportation, I bet, came up.
Traffic,
Sorry, I meant traffic came up.
Huge.
Yeah,
Huge. Yes, that was probably 20 to 25 minutes of the hour and a half or so.
yeah.
And today we did all of the principals and started discussing kind of just grade alike orientation. And then we also met our first round of community leaders to get their input. Traffic came up again with them.
Shocker.
And then additional items. So we have a really robust list going into things.
Okay.
And it's nice to start seeing where things align and where other things come up as concerns for parents versus faculty. And the community survey went out and we've already received 186 responses to that. So we've been digesting some of the stuff that's come through pairs for our meetings, but we're hoping to still see more results to that.
What level do you expect on that? I mean, what do you see?
Varies on community. I
Yeah.
would say a lot of times 40% of the community is what.
Oh, that'd be good if you got 40%.
Yeah.
You guys just take a moment and kind of, this is your opportunity to set our expectations for what you want us to be doing next month. So you're gonna be coming in, delivering kind of an overview of what you've learned, or are we at a point where you're gonna have some recommendations, or what? Set our expectations for next month.
I think we're gonna have a lot of that data, the discovery data piece, but I do think after some of the discussions we've had, we'll be having some of those initial dives into not solutions necessarily, but how we can see some things coming together, because when we came into this process, it seemed like very much cut and dry elementary, and with all of the studies and what we've been hearing, we want to make sure we put you in a good position for the district to have growth overall, so that you can affect all of your students rather than just one singular.
I also want to thank the team. They worked with the principals today, shared a lot of the information. I could just see how things are starting to come together. Shared a lot of enrollment information. Some pieces that I found fascinating also is classroom space availability as it relates to what the needs are and what the space is. So all color-coded charts that were wonderful. So very appreciative and received lots of positive feedback from people. So I'll be sending that on to you. But thank you for your work. It's really coming along, and I think it's exciting about where we're headed.
One last thing, because you guys were here last Monday, and I think it was Joe shared, because Jeff would like to hear this. You shared with us that you had the first bid come back that was under.
We did.
You want to just share that so Jeff can rest tonight?
Well,
I'm not even over the water bill yet.
That's your well. I'm working on facility.
I know.
two?
Just last week, we had another one bid, and it was under its budget estimate.
It's like the first time in 2 years we've had projects come in on the budget, but don't.
I'm gonna tell you.
Just sleep well tonight.
Yeah, I'm gonna tell you something. I said to these guys a while back, by the time we get ready to go to bids, it should start coming back down. And I said that, 6 months ago, and I believe that. I mean, these can't hold. Life is not gonna hold like it is today.
You hope so, but there's definitely other projects where we just continue to solve the escalation.
Really?
Mechanical units are just out of control.
Yeah.
But hopefully, cross your fingers, maybe.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much.
Josh,
It is
anything else
good
from
news.
you on facilities? And you can sit in some of these meetings.
No, it's been really good. I was really pleased to go through the presentation. A lot of hard work. They had a pretty good understanding of their needs. So everyone's pretty heavily on that, pretty confident.
Thank you very,
Yeah,
very
thanks
much.
for staying, guys.
Appreciate you staying.
You guys go home now.
You might listen to this little
Oh,
piece.
so yeah, so-
It's like a pack what we can do.
Travis,
And then we'll leave.
Travis Squires is gonna tell us how much money we might have.
We can't miss this part.
No, I would say
The handout is, we're gonna,
Zoom them in. Yeah, we got the handout,
and then the handout is.
the quick capacity handout. Good, we pull that up. Travis, you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Gotcha.
Okay. I will go over a couple quick things. Am I able to share my screen or not?
Yes.
Okay, let me do that real quick. Okay, I'll give you a little bonus material. Just to kind of set the stage. I'm going to give you just 5 minutes here on the bond market before we go into that. Just to temper CMBA's expectations. So a couple things on the bond market, and I'm just going to hit a few highlights here. Just there's really about 7 update points. This first one here speaks to historical Fed fund rate movement. And so just to get an idea of really kind of where we're at on this Fed rate cycle, off here to the right, you can see we're, just north of that 2 to 2.25% range. And if you go back, the last time we really hit these levels were 18, 19, before the Fed started to make movement looking ahead to perhaps the need to cut rates again. But other than that, you have to go back to 08, where the Fed fund rates were as high as they currently are. And then I'm going to take you through a cycle of rate movement. So this is the past week. Market benchmarks. Blue bars is MMD, which is just a municipal market rate, and the orange is the Treasury. So 2, 3, 5-year Treasuries moving 0.25% in the past week. And you can see as you move out on the curve, 20-year, 30-year, a lot less movement. This is kind of creating what's commonly known as an inversion in the yield curve. Oftentimes does point towards recession. The interesting point I'd make here is that Treasury rates have moved and bond market rates, or the blue bars, have not moved as much in this past week, which is a little bit different, I guess you would say. But again, this is a week, kind of speaking to the volatility. Market update here, 3 picks up a municipal market benchmark over the past year. So you can see a year ago, this 10-year benchmark sitting under 1%. Today, it's at 2.25. You can see kind of the average over the past year. It really shows a lot of this volatility and rate increase over the past year, but then you put that in the context of more of a 10-year history on market movement, going back to August of 2012. You can kind of see the peaking here in 2013, the dip there then really in August of 2020, and kind of hovered there to last fall until kind of reaching what I'd call more kind of the 10-year average here recently. What's driving some of this? You look at kind of this 5-year supply and demand, a lot of money moving out of the markets this year. You can see these orange numbers off to the right here represent market outflows. So you can see we had a huge run of inflows in the bond market. So the supply demand is creating some issues. You can kind of see how this black yield curve line kind of tracks these outflows as well. And then, you know, really ignore the COVID blip where lots of money left the market really quick. So then, you know, where are we at in the 10-year range? This current line represents really some of the shorter term rates are near the upper half of the range, but really we're sitting about average rates over the last 10 years. So you've heard rates increasing, Fed's going to move rates, and really we've just come off of our lows and we're sitting more at historical averages. But yeah, do interest rates really matter? You know, this is really the slide that kind of brings it home for entities considering borrowing money. And, you know, just a kind of a quick math, right? If we have a 20-year debt with $1 million annual payments, those payments are going to go towards principal and interest on the loan. You know, money that goes towards principal on a loan, you know, those are really turned into project funds. So at a 2% rate and $1 million fixed payment over 20 years, if you're assuming equal payments, you can turn that $1 million annual payment to $16.35 million of project funds in a 2% rate environment. If we're in a 4% rate environment, you're only turning that into $13.6 million of project funds. So you can see kind of the loss of purchasing power with increasing interest rates, because a greater percentage of your payment goes towards interest than principal. So it in effect lowers your net bond proceeds by a pretty significant margin when we're considering borrowing in a 2% or 3% or 4% rate environment. This spring, we were seeing a lot of 3.5% to 4% rates. I think we've kind of settled down a little bit closer to 3.5% rates on 20-year school general obligation debt. But again, any debt that you have is also backloaded surrounding some of your existing debt portfolio. So again, that's my quick 5 minutes on the market. Any questions before kind of going into where we see your current financial scenario?
Questions? Go ahead, Travis, keep going.
Okay. So again, this is now the handout you have in front of you. The first page, you know, really does represent, you know, some of historical data. You know, we see, you know, notes here on valuations. You know, your 10-year growth rates, you know, in the 5.5% to 6% rate, depending on which metric you're looking at. You know, the actual value we use for debt limit purposes, or the taxable valuation, which is used for generating the revenues for your levies. You know, a brief snapshot on tax rate history. You know, currently this only shows through 2022. But fiscal 22 representing your lowest levy rate year in the past 10. So kudos to your district there. You've been operating very efficiently. And really some of this is the reality of, you know, school funding being at low levels. If you can only grow your general fund budget at 2.25%, 2.5% per year, by definition, you need less dollars to operate the district and thus less property taxes. So that's part of what's driven some of the taxes lower. The other thing would be just your district getting to a little bit more sustainable level of operating fund balances, cash reserve needs that stabilized over the last couple of years. Debt limit is really going to be one of those constraints that we're going to have to monitor as you move forward. Debt limit, by definition, it's 5% of your 100% valuation before rollback. So we're taking that $1.078 billion, multiplying that by 5%. It comes up with a debt limit margin there at $54 million. Over the next couple of years, if we assume 4% valuation growth, you're going to see that debt limit move from 53 to 58, perhaps 60. We can do some stress testing on this as we kind of work our way forward. But you're going to take that debt limit, subtract out your cumulative debt outstanding, and that's going to run a remaining debt limit number that's going to be something that we're going to have to monitor going forward. So I'm not too concerned about this right now, but as you continue to design projects and look at maximizing resources, debt limit may be your constraint versus what I'll call kind of the bonding capacity in each of your revenue streams. And so we're going to be meeting both at once. So just keep this kind of 33 to 35 million of capacity as kind of your benchmark over the next couple of years, depending on how much resource you want to tap out of both your debt levy and your sales tax.
Hey, real quick, Charles, that 4% growth that's used there, is that just based off of historical? Is that where that number came from?
Yeah, we've been benchmarking numbers close to 2/3 of your historical average. If you kind of peel back, you do see some blips. When we start moving into short-term planning, historical averages can cause hiccups. I'd say the best example of that, and the MBA is familiar. There's a district in Northwest Iowa that had one of these blips on their debt limit on a project that CMBA was working with, and that caused a lot of stress for everybody involved, just because in the year in which they were trying to sell bonds, they missed their target. And so therefore they didn't have the bonding capacity to issue the debt, and there was already a project let. Yes, it was a reasonable expectation. They should have got the valuation growth, but on the actual valuation, this district, which had a lot of ag land, ended up losing some value on the ag land. And then the way the rollback rates hit statewide, they actually lost valuation and lost debt limit capacity. So there's things outside of, we saw a house go up, we saw 10 houses go up in the district, therefore we know that increases valuation. Well, not necessarily, given other constraints and things that happen at the county and state level. So as we get into zeroing in that, hey, we're going to borrow this money in the next year or two, I think it's best to have some level of conservatism. And if you don't want to be conservative, then that's fine. We just have to know, if this assumption doesn't come true, what project are we delaying or downsizing as we move through the scenario? And that's just kind of this tension back and forth that we have to, as noted with the tension regarding enrollment, we just have to understand the implications either way and own the result the way it comes out. And that's you can direct us on how to present information, and we can give you, hey, here's what happens if it's at our historical growth levels. And then I can say, yes, that works. Let's stress test this. Are you prepared to put $2 million of, change orders in, or, bid alternates, if you will, into the project, just in case these assumptions don't come true? Because we're always writing this capacity number, 12 to 18 months before you're getting ready to bid. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Yeah.
So the next kind of component we move towards are, what are some of your resources available for consideration right now? So you have the voter PEPL through 28. You've got the sales tax revenue purpose statement already extended. And you did that in November of 19. So we can kind of mark out, revenues that you'll receive in your capital project fund at about $2.6 million annually. You currently do have debt payments for the sales tax of about $835,000 annually through fiscal 29. So if you look at, what's available after debt, it's about 1.78 million. In that 1.78 million, you have to buy your buses, pay for your technology. You've got some non-instructional software expense in there, and you're also doing some of your kind of summer or annual maintenance projects. So after making your debt payments, yes, it's 1.78 million available, but not all of that remains available for, financing new projects, but a good portion of it does. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay. So, the next page when we get into bonding capacity or this quick capacity sheet, gets a little bit, what I'll say, more straightforward. We do have assumptions built into here. So on general obligation debt, quick reminder, any vote on a bond referendum, 60% approval. You have existing debt in this class already, and you previously voted this 405 levy authority. Any new debt structure would be set up to wrap around to create level aggregate debt. So once the new bonds were sold, then you'd look at your debt portfolio and it'd look like, hey, we've got level debt payments over the next 20 years. Depending on your scenario, the way that we set this up is, looking to borrow in the spring of 23. And then we've looked at multiple year structures. For example, when you look at these options, the levy years is really the number that varies. So with 20 levy years, that's one debt issuance. On option one, we'd assume 4.8% growth, which is 67% of your historical average. If we assume rates are 0.5% higher than today's rates, you would have $16.9 million as your bond amount, about $16.7 million to spend. Your annual payments are $2.8 million. If we fast forward and say, well, we might vote in the spring of 23, but we're not going to bid this project, and so we don't need all the money in the spring of 23. We could live with having some of the money in the spring of 24, perhaps even a little bit into the spring of 25. That's when we start looking at these other levy scenarios. So the 21-year scenario would assume debt issued in the spring of 23 and a second issue in the spring of 24. In doing so, we get 21 levy years, and we potentially get to count that second year of valuation growth. In this case, we'd be looking at $20.7 million as the bond amount. So some of that increase between those scenarios is the result of stretching it out, your overall payments out one more year, and some of it is recognizing a second year of valuation growth. So in this case, you're at $20.5 million of project funds on a $2.9 million annual payment. And again, that $2.9 million annual payment, that's aggregate. It's including your existing debt that's outstanding. And then the third scenario, probably a little bit more aggressive. In this case, you've got to hit, every apple, 4.8% growth 3 years in a row. Rates only 0.5% higher than today's rates, and we can push that vote amount up to $23.9 million to have about $23.6 million to spend on projects, with a little over a $3 million annual payment. So if you're saying general obligation bonding capacity, this gives you a little bit of flavor for, well, how much do we want to push assumptions? I'm perfectly comfortable in option two, provided interest rates. You're going to have to own those. We don't have any control over that, neither do you. If we move to option three and you want to kind of, what I'll say, push the number on the ballot, because let's say things go in your favor, rates stabilize, valuations go higher, yeah, you might be able to issue that full amount. And your district is a district that I use this example on a lot. Back in 2009-10, interest rates were higher and we set up a scenario of interest rates, and by the time you sold the bonds, they were actually lower than anticipated. And by the time you got to 2013, you had a decent amount of capacity to do a second project without increasing your taxes. Could you have pushed assumptions up front and maybe not had to vote twice within that 3-year period of time? Potentially, right? But you might have needed to phase the 2 projects. So we can talk about that a little bit later. While I'm showing general obligation PEPAL note capacity, you know, I think you pick and choose on how you maximize either PEPAL note capacity or sales tax capacity. Because on paper, you know, we can throw, you know, the bank will loan you money, or the bond market will loan you money for each of these scenarios between PEPAL and sales tax. The real question comes down to is, can you continue to afford to operate the district within your capital project resources and still do these scenarios? So within your voter PEPAL, you can borrow out through fiscal 28. So it's not a long period of time, but you are collecting, you know, roughly 800,000 this year. You assume 1 year's growth, you know, and assume fiscal 24 to 28 revenues, or 5 years of revenues. You could potentially generate about $4.1 million of project funds over that short period of time, but you're committing to a significant increase in your overall payment. So
Travis, is it Travis? It's on that scenario, is your duration of loan only 5 years on that then?
Yeah, correct, because you don't have levy authority beyond 28.
Okay.
I do apologize when I get into the sales tax. This first sentence can be struck here. You do have the capacity in the revenue purpose statement, so that's just a carryover in a template. The biggest thing I have on this, just understand that any new sales tax borrowing is going to require a public hearing. You know, that public hearing process, you want to make sure you get that out of the way, you know, well in advance of your election. So if you're putting together a project budget and you're going to borrow sales tax, and let's say you're planning to vote in March, you might consider moving through this public hearing process if you're going to borrow against the sales tax here, you know, sometime in the next 3-4 months, depending on how quickly your project finance or your projects can come together. We do recommend at least being mindful of whether you want to get the public hearing out of the way in advance of the election, because this does create, you know, an opportunity to potentially have to vote twice on a project should you get a petition. So when we move into sales tax capacity, this really looks pretty strong for you guys. We are not typically in favor of districts leveraging out through 2051, you know, for the same, you know, purpose of thinking about, you know, what are your facility needs going to be over the next so many years? You know, do you want to have all of your sales tax committed towards one project and not be able to use it to address some of your ongoing maintenance needs? Again, if you're putting together a really comprehensive plan that's going to cover your facility needs over the next 20 years, that works well. But if you're thinking, hey, well, this will take care of what we need for 10 years, maybe it doesn't make as much sense to take your sales tax out 25 years to cover what only meets your needs over the next 10 years. So just be mindful as you're putting together the overall scenarios. You can see that I could stack up you know, borrowings of 20 years on the sales tax. In this case, we're showing $12.7 million of project funds and an $18 million borrowing. The main difference is if we're going to go out 20 years and maximize your sales tax, we're going to need to restructure your existing debt. So that's why you see that variance between borrowing amount and project funds. So that 20-year borrowing, you know, 12, let's say 13 million of new debt. Your PEPAL could be $4 million of new debt. Now we're up to 17 million. And if we look at, you know, 20 or 23 million, you know, we're talking the ability on paper for your district to issue $40 million of new debt. That may fit within your debt limit, but it will barely fit within your debt limit. So something to monitor as we go forward. Again, I don't think most districts are in a scenario where they're going to max out sales tax and PEPAL. Usually districts pick one or the other and tend to pick sales tax because of the longer duration. While we think, yeah, you'll probably get a renewal on your voter PEPAL, you don't have it on the books, so you're not able to leverage those resources. And I think it's a little bit up in the air as to whether bond council will allow you to put the voter PEPAL on the ballot as soon as 5 years before the expiration. They may view that to be a little bit far away from when the expiration is supposed to be. That being said, you can't get a no answer unless you ask them. So if you really want to complicate your ballot, you could put your voter PEPAL renewal on at the same time and have that as a potential resource available. So all in all, pretty good scenario. Putting together a financial plan, looking at these various snapshots in time, we're looking at that $33 to $36 million within your debt limit constraint. I think you can issue this debt to meet that scenario. Couple different options I would give. If you looked at GO bond option 2, you could do about $20.7 million of debt. 15-year sales tax scenario puts you pretty close to that $33 million number, depending on how you wanted to put the project together. Option 2 and hitting that limit would be to go with $23.9 million, or that GO bond scenario 3. And then you would have 15-year sales tax, not even at the maximum, to generate additional $9.3 million of debt. So some of the things I would like about that scenario is you're not committing your sales tax beyond 15 years. It gives you plenty of time to pivot if necessary towards other projects and other district needs. At that time, 15 years down the road, how old is the high school at that point? So those are weird questions to ask, but you will start to continue to need other building maintenance needs, perhaps additions that you would want to pay cash for. Obviously then you would consider, we're not applying any existing cash on hand. So if you've built up sales tax money, that could go on top of, sizing towards this debt limit number. So if you've got $2 million of cash, a $33 million debt limit, you can take on $35 million of projects. So, if we're thinking about risks to consider here, there's always going to be risks. We have to make assumptions throughout the process. As noted with the enrollment scenarios, we got to make reasonable expectations and assumptions and be prepared to adjust as needed in the future. In our opinion, the things you got to think about: interest rates, if they're more than 50 or 0.5% higher than the current rates, if valuation growth doesn't continue at the average annually, if you see enrollment dips, could potentially impact cash flow. It sounds like you might get a nice bump ahead this fall. And if we start to see any sort of, the sales tax revenue per student drops, if we see pullback in consumer spending across the state, we see various things that, it always seems like some part of the legislature wants to get their hands on this nice amount of sales tax that keeps coming in. So if you start to see any attempts at diversion or scooping off more growth, those are just risks that you have to consider going forward. That being said, those two options that I present within here, $33 million worth of debt, I think you're in good position to consider projects of that amount. As you continue to work and prioritize projects, though, don't stop short of limiting yourself on these scenarios. If something comes up that you think, these are the priorities, we've got to figure out how to do 40 million. It might not be that, well, we can still do 40 million. We just might have to phase the project. We might have to wait and say, well, we can bid project 2 as soon as we get the debt limit capacity, or as soon as your valuations increase enough that we have more GO bond capacity. We're starting to do some things with various scenarios, and one in particular that will be up for vote in September here for example, for Indianola schools, where they're looking at, phasing high school renovations. So they know they can take on phase one with kind of this reasonable set of assumptions like I presented to you, but we're also adding a second phase 5 years down the road, and they're putting it all on one ballot to accomplish their goals of getting that renovation done over the next 10 years. So, don't stop yourself short on creativity as you work through this facility master plan with these numbers, but, also don't go out and say, hey, we will do 55 million over the next 10 years. That's going to be really hard pressed. But certainly you do have some leeway with these numbers as a good starting point. So any questions?
Yeah, when you talk about the go bonds, when they wrap around the other existing loan, that doesn't influence the interest rate we have on the first set of bonds, does it?
No, it doesn't impact the first set of bonds. Those are fixed rates. The only time that happens is if you get into a scenario where you have a debt restructure. We don't see that happening right now. And if there was any debt structure, it'd be pretty limited. The sales tax, depending on how aggressive you are on those payments, wanting to go out 20 years, for example, you may have some debt restructuring costs, but I don't see that as a major detriment to your financial scenario at this point.
Is it a better option to predict out on your enrollment number and leaving your sales tax uncovered?
I'm not sure I understand. Can you ask that in a slightly different way?
So if you look at the projected outcome, you said we could borrow on our numbers if we wanted to push our numbers, and I don't really want to, but I just want to ask the question. If we want to get to the 22 million borrow amount, that would leave quite a bit of our sales tax money available. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's kind of the trade-off. So, when we get to these scenarios, let's say we adopted option 2 and you didn't get the scenario where valuations grew or rates went up or whatever it was, and you ended up needing to scale this back and could only do 22 instead of 23.9. Well, since we haven't pushed the sales tax scenario, you could just add sales tax debt. So your project budget isn't in jeopardy. You just might have to shift some of the source of funding. So to kind of go along those same line of thoughts, I'm usually in the scenario of if we've got this backstop, we know we can issue sales tax debt if we don't hit the scenario 3 assumptions and only end up at scenario 2. I would lean towards putting scenario 3 number on the ballot. And then knowing that you have a backstop if you need it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it sure does.
You get the sales tax revenue based upon what your actual enrollment is, right? So
yeah, and we're not too aggressive here on future growth, right? We're using current revenue per student, current enrollment. So if you pick up 60 kids, you got a little bit more powder to absorb any sort of interest rate increase that might come along.
And timing, Travis, just real quick, you mentioned public hearing for sales tax. Needs to be ahead of time, and Gail's got all that stuff. And then for bonding, what are the dates like in 2023?
So you've got a March, and an odd year you've got a September and a November vote. March gives you the most flexibility in terms of being able to issue debt the quickest, potentially locking in rates in the spring. It allows you to design and know some of your project assumptions a little bit sooner. If you vote in March, let's say it fails, you could still vote in September because there's a 6-month wait there. If you vote in September, you can't vote again until the following September if it were to fail. Because you do have a 6-month wait, and September election to March, even though it's 6 calendar months, it falls just short of hitting the 6-month window. So those would be the options you'd be looking at. I mean, obviously there's no rush here in terms of you have to do something. You're going to have to evaluate your enrollment needs, and things that derail bond elections are people feeling blindsided and that you didn't do your due diligence. So, hitting the gas at 90 mile an hour to hit March, while that might be nice, it might not be what's most prudent for your district. That being said, your district has been very supportive. This isn't news to anybody. You've been talking about, hey, over the next 5 to 10 years, we might need another building. And so this would be the iteration. Have you reached the nexus point in which you need to start thinking about that?
And there's nothing that changes our credit worthiness of our ratings if we go out farther?
Yeah, this all kind of falls within, the various, I'd say levels of debt that we see within a lot of districts. You're going to reach a point where they say, well, maybe your debt's a little bit more elevated, but you can't make every decision based on what the rating agency thinks about you. You've got to operate the district. So we see a lot of districts start to get comments that, well, it's slightly more elevated relative to your peers. From your standpoint, though, I don't know if that comment would be coming because of the size of your tax base. It's pretty strong. I don't see your rating in jeopardy of downgrade because of adding more debt. It's more likely to happen if you lose the pulse on solvency ratio and were to dip below expectations a couple years in a row. So those are going to be the things that they're probably watching a little bit more closely. But there's always risk when you add debt. Rating agencies change criteria all the time. But you've got strong wealth levels, strong taxable valuation per pupil. So those things are helping, hold your ratings pretty stable.
What's the watermark on solvency ratio that they look at?
Yeah, it's always the higher the better, which is, impossible for Iowa school districts relative to your peers. So because of your limitations, as we've talked about them ranges, I think as we look at your plan, we've been trying to stay above 8-9%, not pushing up above 17-18, because when you start pushing that high, you start locking yourself out of cash reserve, and then you hit this roller coaster like what's happened in the past. So trying to stay in a nice, let's say 12 to 15% range is a good target. If you slide a couple percent on either side of that, you're not going to get penalized as long as it's consistent with expectations, plan, and you've budgeted for it. And the biggest thing that they see is, then if we do fall outside of the range, is there a willingness of the board to increase revenues in order to correct? Where we get into trouble is where we've had school boards say, well, you can't raise the tax rate, even though you should add more cash reserve sooner rather than later. They prefer a 5-year workout instead of a 2-year workout because they don't want to increase the property tax rate by 50 cents. Those are the places where school districts end up getting penalized for not being a little bit more prudent in increasing revenues to account for a dip in the solvency ratio. But we haven't seen that with you guys in the past.
Anything else for Travis?
I think that's good. Thank you very much.
Travis, thank you much as always.
Yeah, and let's just continue to remain in contact. We've got a good relationship with CMBA, your architect, and if you guys got a CM working too, being able to brainstorm and put cash flows on projects. We don't want to stifle their creativity with a number on a sheet of paper, but it does at least put a little bit of dose of what are the expectations But as they kind of work through your priority list, don't hesitate to reach out and say, hey, Travis, we need a scenario for 25 million. What's that going to look like? And if you guys need us to Zoom in again, that's great. I appreciate the ability to not have to drive. It's kind of weird to be on Zoom for you guys since you're so close and I'm usually there in person, but I appreciate the flexibility.
We miss you greatly.
Tyler, I'm sure you do.
He did ask if he should come.
Where does he live?
No, Zoom's good.
No, thanks very much, Travis.
Yeah, great
Yep.
job.
Thank you.
All right, moving along, we've got the bike pedestrian path extension, and I believe Brent, you're gonna speak on that, or Sam on Zoom? Okay.
Just let's talk about it.
All right, Brent, his.
You guys can go. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much.
We got some things to work with.
Yeah. See you next month.
See ya. So I met with Doug Wadey, which would be with Construct, and Scott Williams with Fox Engineering, and then Sam last Tuesday, just kind of doing a pre-construction meeting. So Doug's on board to go, and he could give me an update on when, just because he's super busy. So it will not be done before school starts, obviously.
But it'll be done, I mean, it'll be done this fall.
I would assume so. They said probably between now and when they can't do the work anymore for the year, but he couldn't get an update. He said it shouldn't take too long once they get the dirt work moving, so.
Any questions on it? We've been talking about this for a long time, so I think we all know what's going on.
Probably key, I think I saw that in the notes, was just the communication, especially if there's disruption of the street down to one lane or whatever. Yeah, which Doug said the only time we'll have to go down to one lane is when they're actually working on the shoulder itself. But he said he would work around the school start times for traffic, so. He didn't think it'd be more than a couple hours on one day where he'd be going down to one lane, so. Do it at 7:45 in the morning, see what happens. Sorry.
It's not a good idea.
We have a motion to approve the contract from Construct for a value of $93,661.85.
So moved.
Further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, motion passed.
Thank you for all of it.
Yeah, thank you much. Nice to have that done. Next item, new business, we have the 2022-23 handbooks. There's copies of those all in your packets here.
And the highlights were the only changes?
Correct.
Thank you.
And I know we talked about this last year, Christine. There was some discussion about just some discrepancies between all four. Do you want to just hit on those at all briefly?
Yeah, I think the piece, what we had asked each principal to do is to go back and to look at it more closely, is just see how does it align. And one of the things we talked about a year ago is even one whole like district-wide handbook. It doesn't really work because each school is unique. There are pieces though that we could have. We've been trying to have as consistent as possible, but I know that the one piece that has been brought up is the idea about photographing. So what I'm recommending tonight is that we approve these handbooks, and then I will go back and work with the principals on that one particular piece. The middle school handbook, Mr. Danielson is here, so thank you, Mr. Danielson. He received that language around photo from our district lawyers and support through SAI, and so it has that verbiage in it. So we'll go back and look at that and see if we can get that consistent throughout. I'll bring that back to you in September. We'll still send it out to parents, but knowing that there might be that change in there that we can take care of.
Perfect. We have a motion to approve the 2022-23 handbooks.
So moved.
Second,
Second.
any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? And books approved. Gail, financial reports.
There hasn't been a lot of activity for July. Very limited, so I guess mainly on for the financial piece, just wanted to talk about as we come into the new year about how these reports will look differently until October when the budget is put in there. So basically, from July until September, will only the actual numbers will only show up in the actual numbers and not work with, it will not be representative of these, the green and the red would be pulling off of the line item budget, but the line item budget will not be available until October. So as we go forward for July and August, September, we will only be looking at the monthly actual numbers. And then once the line item budget is fed into those lines, then the page 2 through 4 will become relevant because the information is all there. So that's kind of just a reminder of as we move forward through the year. And the secretary report, just the cash, we are in a, our cash balances look really good. And, we talked about the local option, our save, and we do have a nice cash balance in the save fund. So as we move forward with these plans of our projects, we can look at that. It will definitely provide an option for us. So, and then as we talk about that, we have had a lot of activity in buildings and grounds with projects going on. So our July, our couple and save account and fund has been very active this month. So in 1 month, we spent $641,000 in different projects. And also know that these are, if a project is not done yet, but a purchase order is submitted, it's in there, because it's planned, we know the cost. So we've been, the custodial staff and Brent and have been very busy. We have a new bus coming in at I think next week it'll be shipped to Iowa. So that'll be coming in. We purchased some vehicles. So they've been very busy on projects. So that'll slow down as we move forward because projects will have school starts and those projects will slow down. And nutrition fund, I just wanted to talk about and Deb has done a phenomenal job with her reporting, but on the cash, I'll just speak on the cash side of it. Compared to a year ago, amazing things have happened with that fund. So looking at from year to date compared to a year ago, it just really tells the story. Now as we move forward, it'll be interesting and hopefully we can continue with the financials that we are seeing at this point. So that's all I have. If anybody has any questions.
You think you'll see a lot of movement in the cafeteria when we don't have the paid free lunches?
Yeah, it's a big concern. It's a big concern. Deb just talked to me today about it, and I think we need to do a good job of communicating to parents and trying to get them to maybe set up a payment plan or with our new payment portal, they can have an automatic deposit. So maybe if we can educate them on, can you put a monthly amount in? Can you put a week, how often do you get paid? Maybe we could set up a payment based on when they get paid for their job. So, so they don't get too far behind and just keep up on, because it is, especially at the upper levels where they can buy it a la carte. it adds up fast. And I know families, if you have more than one, it gets kind of scary at times of how much money can be spent.
But
So-
were we not compensated in the fund dollars off of the total amount of enrollment, not off purchases, or is this just purchases?
It's based on participation.
Okay.
So moving forward, this was the last year we received we get revenue by how many kids eat. But that's the basic meal. We do not get compensated for a la carte. So, but in the a la carte world, you have a profit margin that you add on there. But that's only if the parents pay the bills. So that's where the missing, the critical piece is I'm gonna try to keep it positive of trying to get parents aware of their balances, to get them paid, to stay above and before they get too far in the hole, then you just never climb out. So just mainly communicating and working with families, I think is the key. And we are trying, I know Deb is really working on getting families to complete free and reduced meal applications. But we can't, we can't make people do that, but we can definitely say, hey, it's out there and, and constantly communicate that. I do know it's based on income and the amount of members in your household. And if you have a wage, if a husband and wife has a wage, if they earn a paycheck, it's really hard to qualify. Because it's based on gross wages. So, but just again, communicate and work with families the best we can to collect funds is the key for next year.
Gail, thank you very, very much. Consent agenda, anything need to be pulled or discussed?
The entering, so Christine, I don't know if you were made last year with a lure, but entering contiguous districts and the IEP open enrollment students, so A and B are yearly things that we have on the agenda at this time. C is something that we brought later in, I think it was December maybe, but should have been at this time.
Yeah.
So other than that, it's pretty much what it was.
Move to approve. Second,
Yep.
further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Consent agenda passed. First day of school, August 23rd. Thank you very much to all the staff. Excited for the year. It's coming quick. It's always crazy how fast summer goes, but I'm sure the kiddos are excited, or at least some of them are. Next board meeting, September 12th, and CMBA will be presenting to us some of the findings during that board meeting, so it should be a great meeting. And then following October meeting is the 10th. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor to adjourn the meeting?
Aye.
Opposed? The meeting adjourned.